Hi all again after the spring break. I hope you had a good one. So during the spring break, I sent you the midterm questions. It is due on April 16th, but if you want to submit it before April 16th, you can. I want you to submit it on Blackboard. You will see the Turnitin assignment section under the course materials, and you should be able to submit by now, and it is better that you submit it till April 16th. So there are 4 questions. You have to choose 2, and I want you to answer each question with a 1 double-paged essay. This is the thing. And I haven't put any discussion questions this week because you also have the midterm, so I don't want you to do extra work with discussion questions. But so we are beginning today with a new book, as you know by now. It's called Land of Open Graves: Living and Dying on the Migrant Trail by Jason DeLeon. He wrote the book was published in 2015, and for the final paper, I will mention about this from now on, just to let you be prepared as we go on. We will going to compare and contrast the books. So next week, when I put the discussion questions, you'll see that I'm gonna ask you to compare this book with the veiled sentiments. So, and in the slideshow, you will see that I have put some questions comparing the books. So just pay attention to them. I'm gonna send the slideshow to you and put it in the Blackboard after I record this video. So, and if you have any questions with the midterm, just ask me. You're like, oh, I want to answer this question, but I don't know if this idea works or that idea works. Just send me an email. It's all good. I want to be helpful. So, Jason DeLeon, he's himself South American descendant, but I think he's born in the US, so he can give us the perspective of both. Yeah. Both meaning like someone from South America and someone from North America. And this is a book in general about undocumented immigrants mainly from Mexico to the US. And the book is starting, maybe you have noticed, with quite unsettling photographs, like remains of people who died in the desert. There was a skeleton, I think, or people who were seriously injured when they tried to migrate from the desert, from Mexico to the US. And he begins the book by mentioning his own encounter with an immigrant who died in the desert. And he was talking, I think, with an official, saying like, oh wow, that's so heartbreaking, and that's so kind of, it is a huge effect on me. And the official says like, oh no, just wait till tomorrow, no one will remember this. Yeah. So he says that there is, even if it's a huge issue, even if it's an issue that affects many people, many undocumented immigrants and people who live in Mexico, as well as people who live in the US, he says in the American public there is a certain kind of apathy. Yeah, people are not very aware of the situation. Even if people are aware, they do not they they're not very affected by it. And he says, I want to kind of, the aim of my project, he says, I want to kind of direct our attention to this apathy and hear people's voices and make these stories and people who died apparent, visible again. Yeah. So he says on page 3, scrolling down to page 3. Yeah, this book is about the violence and death that border crossers face on a daily basis as they attempt to enter the United States without authorization by walking across the vast southern deserts of Arizona. If you live in the United States, you already know about many of the people we will meet in these pages. They pick your fruit, detail your cars, and process your meat. They toil in occupations that US citizens can't or won't do. Keep in mind, though, that not everyone who crosses the desert is a first timer. And so he's kind of trying to say that these people, even if they do the most kind of essential jobs that keep things going, yeah, these people do the most essential jobs for the infrastructure of the USA, and but still we are not very kind of attentive to their stories, and the people who die are become just numbers. And as I said, De Leon wants to just to reverse the story and kind of foreground the experience of the migrants. That's why he's showing us these unsettling photographs in a way. And he's saying, when I'm showing these unsettling photographs, I want to keep a balance between showing, foregrounding the experience of people and dignity of them. Yeah. And he says that actually I have changed names of people who I spoke to, like the names of his informants, but he didn't change the names of people who died, because he says the families of people who died want their loved ones, deceased loved ones' name to be heard. Yeah. And he's saying the primary theme of this book is violence. How it is constructed in the desert, and how the people who construct this violence benefit from it, and how it affects its families. And he's saying this is not random violence. Yeah, he is using a term called structural violence, which means that, so I'm going scrolling down on page 16 because he explains that in page 16. Yeah, the things in under the title depicting violence, he begins with saying the primary theme of this book is violence, how it is constructed in the desert, its productive nature from the perspective of those benefiting from it, and how its victims come to know its destructiveness. The things that happen to the undocumented migrants who experience the strong pull of the US economy and the simultaneous blunt force trauma of its immigration enforcement practices can be generally characterized as a form of structural violence. It is violence that is indirect. No one individual is responsible for it. Moreover, it often occurs out of sight. Many portray it as natural, and it can easily be denied by state actors and erased by the desert environment. So, what is saying that it's a kind of violence that no one, like no individual, can be kept accountable, responsible for. Yeah, because when an immigrant dies in the desert, it says like, oh, he died because he couldn't get enough food or water, or he died because of the heat. Yeah, so as if the accountable part, as if the guilty one is desert, but he is saying, and he will detail this, De Leon will detail this in further in the remaining parts of the book, that actually uh, it is the border patrol control that kills the immigrants. Yeah, it is the policies about migration. It is the actions of migration police. Yeah, it is a sophisticated combination of different factors and different actors. Yeah, that lead to immigrants' death. But these actors kind of portray this violence as if it occurs due to desert's natural environment. Yeah, this is one big argument of the book, and he's saying, De Leon is saying, I want to kind of reveal the real face of what's going on of this violence, the real actors of this violence. And so he is writing a multi-sided ethnography. And this is different than what Abu Lughod did in her book. Yeah, Abu Lughod kind of was like, she went to a community, she stayed there for a long time, and she established strong relationships, and then she wrote the ethnography. And I think one of the questions that we may want to ask in comparison to Abu Lughod's work is how this is different, how De Leon's approach is different to ethnography. Yeah. So on page 14, De Leon says, as I at the very last paragraph, he says, as I began working with a population in transit, it soon became obvious that a multi-sided ethnographic approach was needed to capture various elements of the migration process. Over the years, I followed people across multiple states, countries, and continents. Although I conducted several dozen interviews during a 10-day trip to Ecuador in 2013, numerous short trips to New York in 2013 and 2014, and some 2 dozen domestic and international phone calls and Skype interviews, most of the ethnographic, forensic, and archaeological data were collected in the border town of Nogales, Mexico, the northern Mexican town of Altar, and the desert of the Tucson sector between Nogales and Sasabe. So what he's saying is that I had the main site, which was the border in Mexico. Yeah, that is the site that I focused mostly. But alongside that site, I have went to New York. I conducted Skype interviews from people in New York. I went to Ecuador, and I included those things in my ethnography too. So he's not talking about a bounded group of people, but he's talking about an experience which is peculiar to certain identity. Yeah, that is immigrants. Yeah, and immigrants are not confined to a nation state, but confined to the experience of migrating undocumentedly from the South of America to United States. And he is saying that, like, as an effort to include immigrants' perspective and kind of foreground his analysis on this perspective, he is using, as you might have kind of observed or noticed by now, he's using some Spanish words in italic form. Yeah, and I think it's a nice add to the book. And he says on page 14 in the beginning of the second paragraph, if my writing is at times acerbic or in non-standard academic English or untranslated Mexican slang, it is because I'm trying to match the frankness, sarcasm, and humor of my interlocutors, as well as the grittiness of the difficult worlds they inhabit. And as an other effort to kind of foreground his analysis on foreground the voice of the immigrants, he's saying that he's not doing what some other anthropologists do, which was crossing the border with the immigrants. Yeah, so he says he's not doing that because he had 3 reasons of not doing that. Because people who did that, who kind of wrote their ethnography as a result of their journey with the immigrants, kind of end up uh, prioritizing their own experience, the experience of the ethnographer over the immigrants. Yeah. So since they kind of went through the trial, through the road with the immigrants, They do not write about people's voices, about people's experiences, but their own. Yeah, so, and this is something that he just doesn't want to do. He says, I don't want to end up writing about my own voice. Yeah. Also, he says that there is a structural difference between myself and the immigrants. He's saying, in the case that we are caught in the desert, I'm not gonna suffer the consequences as much as the immigrants will do. Yeah, he's giving an example of a person who happened, like, I think it's the anthropologist's name is Holmes, and he was crossing and they got caught, and he was detained, but even in the detention center, he was put in a different room and he was treated differently, and then he was just released. But immigrants continued to be just numbers and continued to be treated badly. Yeah. And the third one was kind of, he said, even if it's not a big crime for a US citizen to try to um, pass the border like in an undocumented manner, it is still a crime. And he was thinking of this, like, his own kind of history. Sorry, like, he was thinking the effects of a potential, even a petty crime, on his CV or on his future career. Um, I think this is all I want to say. Yeah, just comment on what you think about this book, if you liked reading it. If I know that my students from previous years, they think that this is much more approachable. This is much more enjoyable to read than Abu Lughot's book or some other readings that we've done. And this is a very, like, kind of a topic that people who live in the United States are very familiar with. Yeah, this is not a topic but people who are in the other side of the world. I kind of, after doing that, I wanted to bring our attention to a topic that is problematic in the United States, but something that we don't, I think, talk about or focus enough. Also, I have been reading articles about the effects of coronavirus, for example, the lives of immigrants. Yeah, what's happening in detention center in the coronavirus times, like this, when this coronavirus crisis happened. I think one of the questions that we ask, like, how the crisis is building on or creating or reproducing the already existing systems of inequality. Yeah. So, and I've read articles saying that the situation in the detention centers are terrible because there is no precaution against people having and spreading the virus, and obviously the treatments, like healthcare, is not even nearly to be adequate for immigrants who are in detention centers. Yeah, you can write about what you think in general in the comments. And as I said, I will write questions to discussion board next week. And yeah, we will continue with chapter 1 on Thursday. Thank you.